The day my son declared me legally incompetent, the letters on the court summons looked like they'd been cut from the old paper patterns I used to trace on a work table under hot lights. A name I stitched into Broadway labels for 30 years now sat alone on a page that said I could not be trusted to spend my own money or make my own choices. The envelope was thin. The air was thinner. The hallway outside my Chicago brownstone smelled like wet wool and neighbor's coffee. I read that phrase again, incapacitated person, and said it out loud, because the room had gone too quiet to breathe. If you're listening, I want you to know I am not a perfect mother or a fragile saint. I am a woman who has caught more needles before they hit the floor than any stagehand you've ever met. I am a woman who can look at a seam and tell you where it will split 3 dances from now. And when I saw my son's signature beneath those words, sworn statement, emergency petition, I knew exactly which seam had finally given way. It wasn't my memory. It was the invisible line that keeps love from becoming a rope. I slid the papers into the big red portfolio I had used on my last show, the one that smelled faintly of glue and velvet, and I did something I have not done in years. I called for an audience, not to be applauded, to be believed. Because this is America, and sometimes the only way to be believed is to take your pain and set it under a spotlight so bright that even a liar blinks. My name is Ruth Calder, retired Broadway costume designer, widow, homeowner, and, according to my son's lawyer, a danger to myself. This is the story of how he tried to take my life apart in a courtroom and how I turned the courtroom into my stage. I didn't cry, not then. Crying is for after the curtain. Instead, I put on lipstick the color of cranberries at Thanksgiving, tied my silver hair into a knot that says, "Do not underestimate," and started rehearsing the truth. It began long before the paperwork, long before Evan learned the names of judges and the price of my house. It began in the small ways a son can test a mother's edges, not out of curiosity, but control. He noticed when I forgot a word. He underlined it. He noticed when I took 2 minutes too long to find my keys. He timed me. He started calling my friends bad influences, as if laughter were a narcotic I couldn't handle. After my husband, Philip, died, Evan came around often, the way a concerned son does, bearing groceries and questions. "Mom, you didn't pay your electric bill on time. Mom, you left the oven light on. Mom, you still keep cash in an envelope?" The questions came with gentle smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes, and every smile had a message stitched inside. "You can't be trusted. Let me help." One Sunday, he set 3 pill bottles on my kitchen counter like props and asked me which one was for blood pressure. I knew, but I answered slowly because in that instant, I could feel the future peeking through the curtains, the way you see a stagehand sneaker when a set piece moves too early. He marked a tally on his phone. "I'm just keeping track," he said. "It'll help us later." Later came faster than I expected. My brownstone sits on a block of brick and stubborn trees, caught between an expensive bakery that puts salt on everything and an Irish bar where the lights come on before the sun sets in winter. The house is 4 floors of creaking history and wardrobes built into the walls. On the 3rd floor, I kept an old dress form named Ethel and a table where I still mended for neighborhood theaters. Sometimes I'd open the windows and let the voices from the sidewalk float in and out of the rooms like chorus girls. I was happy there, alone but not lonely, surrounded by work that still made sense. A busted zipper, a hem that wouldn't lie flat, a jacket that belonged to a boy who wanted to look like a king. Evan said the house was too big for me. It's an asset you're not using. And I would say, I am using it. I walk it like a stage every morning. He'd smile his spreadsheet smile. Real estate isn't a stage, Mom. He has a wife, Alyssa, who prefers the term partner. She is tall and graceful and permanently anxious. When she hugs me, she keeps her hips far away, like our bones might quarrel. She wears delicate shoes and a treadmill on her wrist. I don't dislike her. I simply don't know her. Once she told me she wishes we could modernize our expectations of family. And I said, "Darling, family existed before the word modern." In January, Alyssa miscarried. Evan didn't tell me for 3 weeks. When he did, it was on a Monday, like bad press. He sat at my breakfast table and said it with his hands folded, as if the news were a negotiation he'd practiced. I touched his wrist. He pulled away. That distance, barely a breath, was the first stitch that popped. After that, visits changed. He'd bring pamphlets, trusts, long-term care, guardianship, memory screenings. He left them tucked between my cookbooks like perfume ads. He installed a smart hub in my hallway without asking, a small black eye that watched the temperature, the lights, and me. He set my bank to send him notifications. For safety, he said. And when I objected, he laughed that laugh sons learn somewhere around age 13. "Mom, don't be dramatic." The summons arrived on a Wednesday. On Tuesdays, my neighbor Nora comes by with a tin of her sister's biscotti and news from the alley. She is the kind of woman who makes a room feel supervised in the best way. She raised 3 boys alone and never once called it a sacrifice. I handed her the papers. She read silently, her jaw tightening like a purse clasp. She said, "We're not going to panic," which is Nora for break out the good coffee and call everyone. Everyone meant 2 people. My primary care physician, Dr. Malhotra, who once let me stitch the cuff of her white coat while she listened to my heart, and Janelle Ortiz, the lawyer who lives 2 doors down and keeps her sneakers by the front door because justice for her is not a slow process. Janelle is the daughter of a seamstress who never got paid what she deserved. When I told her about the petition, she looked at my hands and said, "Can you still thread a needle without glasses?" I did the first time. She said, "Good, you're going to thread a whole lot of needles." We began with something I learned in the theater. You don't argue with the lighting designer. You offer him a better cue. The petition claimed I had memory lapses inconsistent with safe, independent living. Fine. We scheduled a neuropsych evaluation. We pulled my medical records. We asked Dr. Malhotra to conduct a full cognitive workup. She agreed, but she also tilted her head like a director suspecting a bad script. "Why did he go straight to an emergency petition?" she asked. "Why not talk to me?" Because this is not about care, I wanted to say. It's about custody. We also dealt with the garbage that accumulates around fear, the small stories you tell yourself at 2 a.m. when the house shifts. What if I am slipping? What if the lost word isn't from distraction but decay? What if he's right and I'm too proud to see it? Janelle said, "Fear loves to wear a lab coat." She wrote a list on a yellow pad. Gather evidence, record conversations where legal, change passwords, freeze credit, home cameras, capacity letter, witnesses. I watched her write, and I felt like I was back in a workroom, chalking the lines of a complicated bodice on silent fabric, each mark a decision you can't afford to regret. That night, someone tried the brownstone's back door. They didn't get far. The deadbolt I installed could hold back a bear with a grudge. Nora called from her window across the alley. Dog? Raccoon? We both knew it wasn't a raccoon. The old gate made a particular sound when a person touched it. Timid metal, surprised at its own voice. In the morning, my camera showed a figure in a hoodie with the familiar slope of shoulder. I didn't show Nora. Not yet. I still wanted to protect my son's shape in my mind. 2 days later, Evan came by with flowers that smelled like laundry. I let him in. He looked around as if the house were a patient refusing to get on the scale. "You still haven't moved the rugs," he said. "They're tripping hazards." "Then pick up your feet," I said. He sat at my table, folded his hands, and started what I now know was a script. "Mom, this isn't adversarial. This is preventative. The statistics, don't tell me about statistics. I've dressed actors who had to cry every night at 9:47 and still needed their pants to lie right. People are messier than your bar charts." His smile tightened. "I'm trying to help you. You're resisting help." "I'm resisting a coup," I said. He blinked at the word. He's never liked vocabulary that implies he's not already in charge. "Why an emergency petition?" I asked. "Why not talk to me?" "I did talk to you. You contradict yourself. Last week you told me you were out of checks, and then I found a book of them in the drawer." "I also told you I didn't want you going through my drawers," I said. "That part didn't stick?" "What about the time you left the kettle on?" he pressed. "That was grief, not decay," I said quietly. "You don't get to call my sorrow a symptom." He stared at his hands as if they might offer him a line. When he looked up, his eyes were glass. "I don't want to fight." "I already started the fight," I said. "You just did it on paper first." He sighed. "Mom, if we don't get ahead of this, the court will appoint a stranger. The court will do what is right if you tell the truth." He smiled again, smaller, watching how the smile landed. "Of course," he said, "the truth." When he left, I sat with the flowers and the papers and the feeling that a trap had been set in a house I decorated. Janelle filed our response. She asked for a continuance to allow the medical evaluation, and she requested discovery, everything Evan had used to support his petition. In a show, discovery is when the audience learns a secret. In court, it's when you see how much lying a person can do with a word processor. Evan's packet was thick and tidy. It included emails about concerns, a log of my supposed confusions, 2 affidavits from friends of his who said I repeated myself at a fundraiser, and 1 letter on letterhead from a doctor whose clinic I had never stepped inside. The letter used kind words: advisable review, potential decline, family oversight. It did not state a diagnosis. It implied it, with the patience of a wolf. Dr. Malhotra frowned at the letter. "This doctor hasn't examined you," she said. "He's crossing a line." She scheduled my evaluation for Tuesday at 9. She told me to sleep, to eat protein, to ignore the urge to swallow the entire internet about dementia. And Ruth, she added, if you forget a word, use another one. That's not evidence, that's life. Every afternoon, I walked. Chicago in February wears a thin coat of regret. I passed a pawn shop whose window always held 1 trumpet, 1 sewing machine, 1 wedding ring. I passed a church that had replaced its sign with an LED screen, the verses scrolling too fast for comfort. I used to walk to clear my head. Now I walked to fill it with something other than strategy. I would list fabric textures in my mind: a mantra, voile, gabardine, crepe, organdy, taffeta, chiffon. I would say the names of the women I had dressed, dancers whose feet had bled onto silk that still hangs in closets in a theater district that owes me nothing but memory. The evaluation was 6 hours, with a break for a sandwich that tasted like a decision. They asked me to draw a clock. I drew one with the hands pointing to the moment just before the curtain. They asked me to remember 5 words after a delay. I sang them in my head to the tempo of a chorus. They asked me to name animals. I said fox, raccoon, pigeon, sun. The examiner looked up at that one. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. When I handed the pencil back, my fingers trembled, not from fear, from anger. A test like that cannot hold the meaning of a life. But the world loves numbers, so I gave it my careful best and then walked home under a sky the color of a bruise ready to turn yellow. At home, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed and took out the red portfolio. I filled it with what I had: tax returns, utility bills, volunteer schedules, the newsletter I edited for a little theater camp, pictures of me teaching 12-year-olds to thread machines and not their hearts through the wrong needle. I added the note I had made 3 months after Philip died, when I could finally write again. I am capable. I read the note now and then, like some women read devotionals. 3 nights before the hearing, Evan called. He didn't mention the case. He asked if I needed anything from the store. I told him no. He paused. "Mom, I love you." "I love you too," I said. I meant it. Love does not evaporate. It stains. "Okay," he said. "See you Monday." "Court is Tuesday," I corrected. The silence that followed was long enough to hold a lie. "Right," he said. "Tuesday." When we walked into the courtroom, it smelled like paper and a touch of floor cleaner that never really leaves. High ceilings, wood that had known the weight of men more certain than they should have been. The judge was a woman with silver hair and black glasses that made her look like a librarian who had seen every bad decision anybody ever made and still wanted the story to end well. Her name was Judge Therese Kaplan. She greeted us with the kind of voice that makes you sit up straighter without resenting it. Evan sat behind his lawyer, a man with a tie that shouted and a watch that whispered. Alyssa sat next to Evan and clasped her hand so tightly I expected diamonds to fall out of her knuckles. Janelle sat beside me, her pen poised like a needle, ready to take in a loose seam if one popped under pressure. The judge reviewed the petition. "Emergency guardianship," she read. "Claims of cognitive decline. Miss Calder, do you have counsel?" "Yes, Your Honor," Janelle said, standing. "We also have medical records, a cognitive evaluation completed this week, and evidence regarding the petitioner's financial motivations." Evan's lawyer shifted in his chair. "Objection," he said automatically, like a reflex. "Speculative. Overruled for now," Judge Kaplan said. "Let's see what we have." They called Evan first. He walked to the stand with the posture of a man who believes he is saving something beautiful from itself. He talked about moments, a forgotten appointment, a 10-minute delay in finding a coat, a stove knob left on warm. "It's not one thing," he said. "It's the pattern." "What is your mother's current diagnosis?" Janelle asked on cross. "Well," he began, and there it was, the crack. "We don't have a formal one yet, but Dr. Harwood says—" "Dr. Harwood never examined my client," Janelle said, presenting the letter. This is not a diagnosis. It's a suggestion. And conveniently, Dr. Harwood is a golfing buddy of the petitioner, appearing on his social media at multiple fundraisers. We have photos. Social media photos are not evidence, Evan's attorney snapped. They are if they establish a relationship that colors a purported expert's letter, Janelle replied, flipping to a printout. Time, date, and location stamped. The judge adjusted her glasses. Mr. Caldershaw, did you speak with your mother's primary care physician? I left a message, he said. You did not consult her doctor, the judge concluded without looking away. You went to court first. I was concerned for her safety. Emergencies require speed. Emergencies also require honesty, the judge said. They called me next. The oath tasted like penny metal. I told the truth. I told it like I was back in a fittings room, telling an actress that the zipper will hold if she trusts me. I told the judge that I manage my bills, that I cook, that I forget words sometimes, like everyone who has ever thought in more than one direction at once. I told her about my walks and my students in the newsletter and my neighbor who has permission to barge in if I don't answer within the second ring. I told her about the kettle. I told her it was grief. And I told her about a back gate that squeaked on a Thursday. Then I reached into my red portfolio and handed Janelle a flash drive. This is my hallway camera footage from the night before my son installed the smart hub, I said. He entered with a copy of my key and moved through the rooms taking photographs of my medication and my desk. He did not announce himself. He told me he was concerned for my safety. He did not tell me he had hired a locksmith. Evan's head jerked toward his attorney so fast I heard Alyssa inhale like a gas pit caught on her ribs. We don't need to see home videos, the lawyer said. We absolutely do, the judge said. She watched 30 seconds with her eyes narrowed and then looked at my son like she wanted to hand him a broom. Mr. Calder, did you take photos of your mother's medications without her knowledge? I was cataloging for the doctor, he said. Which doctor? The one who never saw her? The judge asked. He didn't answer. Janelle submitted Dr. Malhotra's report. I watched the judge read, her pen resting at the top of the paper. It says here your scores are within normal limits for your age, she said to me. It also says no evidence of neurocognitive disorder. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I also brought my calendar and the costumes for the spring pageant. The room laughed. The judge's mouth did not, but her eyes softened. Miss Ortiz, you mentioned financial motivations. Yes, Your Honor. Janelle didn't stand on ceremony. She stood on fact. We subpoenaed bank notifications. Mr. Calder requested a cash-out refinance quote on Miss Calder's home 2 weeks before filing this petition. He also applied for a business loan listing the property as potential collateral. We have emails and a voicemail. That's ridiculous, Evan said, rising from his seat. It was preliminary. Sit down, Mr. Calder, the judge said. Janelle pressed play on a voicemail. Evan's voice, polite and professional, asking a banker if guardianship would make the refinance more efficient. The message ended with him thanking the banker by name. When the recording stopped, the room felt like the few seconds after the last light goes out and everyone has to decide whether to clap. Alyssa stared at her hands. She did not look up. Anything else? The judge asked, as if she already knew the answer. One more thing, I said. My voice surprised me by being still. I've kept a journal since I was 14. This is the page from the night my husband died, where I wrote that I would learn to live alone without becoming a person who hoards the past. And this, I lifted a newer page, is from the night my son told me I had left the oven light on and called it decline. I wrote,
Do not let him narrate your life to you. The judge did her best not to show feeling. She failed a little. Miss Calder, thank you for your clarity. She turned to Evan. Mr. Calder, petitions like this exist for a reason. People do need help, sometimes urgently. But courts do not exist to facilitate power plays within families. You did not speak to your mother's doctor. You did not seek a diagnosis. You did, however, seek a way to leverage her equity. I'm denying your petition with prejudice.
Evan's lawyer stood. Your Honor, with prejudice, the judge repeated, and I'm referring the matter to Adult Protective Services to ensure Miss Calder's safety is not compromised by retaliatory behavior. Temporary restraining order for 30 days on unannounced entries. Miss Ortiz, prepare the order. The gavel came down with a modest thud. The audience, that is the court, exhaled. Alyssa cried in whatever way people cry when they've trained themselves never to be heard. Evan stared at the tabletop like he could will it to lift him. Outside the courtroom, the hallway smelled like old stories and second chances. Nora met me there. I don't know how she always knows where to be. She pressed something into my hand. It was a lemon candy. For shock, she said. You tremble a little less if your mouth has a job. Janelle hugged me. You did it, she said. No, I said. We did it. Evan walked towards us. I saw the boy he'd been under the man he'd become, the freckles that never left his nose, the way his shoulders still curled slightly when he knew he had disappointed me. He stopped 3 feet away, a distance that felt both too far and too close. Evan, said Mom. Don't, I said softly. Not now. Alyssa touched his elbow. Evan, she whispered, a plea and a verdict in one syllable. He shook her hand off. For the first time, his eyes found mine without flinching. I was trying to help, he said. No, I said. You were trying to own. He opened his mouth. No words came. He closed it again. You'll be sorry, he whispered, and I thought of all the ways we use the future as a weapon when the present defeats us. He walked away, fast enough to make the doors hiss. Alyssa watched him go with a face like someone listening to a song she once loved and now can't remember the words to. That night, I slept for 4 hours, which is 3 more than I'd managed in a week. In the morning, I put the court order on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a tomato and made eggs that didn't apologize for their edges. I watered the plant that had survived 3 winters by the back window. I opened all the shades so the brownstone could feel the light on its old bones. And then I called Dr. Malhotra and told her I wanted a copy of every page. Of course, she said. You were eloquent, Ruth. I wasn't eloquent. I was prepared. If you're listening, I hope you understand that preparation is love in a different costume. There is the soft love that holds a hand in the dark, and there is the fierce love that says, you may not cross this line. Both are love. Women my age are asked to be only the soft kind. I am both. Nora came by with biscotti, too hard to eat with teeth we paid good money for. We dunked them in coffee and sat at my kitchen table like 2 jurors deliberating the rest of our lives. What now? She asked. I said, I'm going to keep on living, and I'm going to teach. What? She asked, though she already knew. Costume, I said, and how to sew your name where someone can't rip it out. We started a little program at the community center 4 blocks down in a gym that smelled like hope and old sneakers. We called it Needle and Light.
I taught kids and 3 retirees and a man who said he'd always wanted to learn to hem his own pants. I taught them to pin without fear, to unpick without shame, to measure twice, and to trust their fingers. The first day, a boy with a scar on his eyebrow asked, "Do boys even do this?" I said, "Only the ones who want their clothes to fit." He laughed like he hadn't expected to be seen. In March, a reporter called. She had heard about the case from a clerk who attended our community center. She wanted to do a story on guardianship abuse. I said she could use my name if she spelled it correctly. She asked if she could photograph me. I said yes, but not in my kitchen. I wanted the photos in the workroom with Ethel, my silent dress form who had measured 5,000 false waists and never once told a woman to eat less. The article ran with a headline that made me sound braver than I felt. My mailbox filled with letters from strangers who had fought similar wars. It turns out there are many of us, and some of us win. Evan texted me once. It was brief, sharp, typed too fast. "I hope you're happy. If you get sick for real, don't call me." I stared at the screen and tried to imagine the boy whose hands had once cupped a paper boat as if it were a ship that could save us both. I didn't reply. Silence is a sentence you can choose. Alyssa texted 3 days later. Her message was not sharp. It was a thread. "Ruth, I am so sorry. I should have stopped him. I don't know how to fix anything. I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while." She asked me about grief books. I sent her the title of the one that let me sleep during the second winter. She wrote "thank you" with the period that felt like a prayer. 2 weeks passed. I learned every squeak of the community center floor. I learned that people who have never held a needle will apologize to it when they prick their own fingers. I learned that teenage girls will teach you more about courage in one afternoon than a year of watching cable news. And I learned that my hands do not forget how to make beauty, even when my heart is tired.
One afternoon, a boy named Dante came in late. He had hair he'd cut himself and a backpack that had lost the argument with gravity. He wanted to make a jacket for an audition at the school play. He had never been on a stage. He had never worn a jacket that fit his shoulders. We measured him. We cut fabric the color of storm clouds. We stitched with a thread I'd saved for 20 years because you never know when you'll need a better line. He stood in front of the mirror in the finished jacket and said, "I look like someone who can do things." I said, "You are someone who can do things. The jacket just agreed." In April, I met with a financial planner who didn't flinch when I told her I wanted to put the brownstone in a trust that protected it from anyone's ambition but mine. She talked me through acronyms that sound like furniture. I asked hard questions. She respected them. We made a plan. I told her I wanted a portion set aside for needle and light. She smiled. "You're building a costume shop out of the rest of your life," she said. "Yes," I said. "I am." When spring arrived for real, and not just on the calendar, I opened every window in the house and let the city in. People complain about Chicago's wind. They forget it is also how we know we're alive. I cooked a recipe my grandmother made when the neighborhood still smelled like coal and dryer sheets. I invited Nora. We ate in the workroom with Ethel because I wanted silk and supper to share a room again. We chewed and listened to traffic and felt safe. Safety is not a small thing. It is the ground on which you can stand and be kind. On a Tuesday, Evan stood outside my gate and yelled my name. The restraining order had long expired, replaced with a brittle politeness enforced by locks. I stepped onto the stoop and did not invite him in. He looked thinner, or maybe his certainty had shed weight. "I lost my job," he said without preamble. "Alyssa left. They're selling the car. You did this." He said it like he was telling me that rain had fallen because I bought a coat. I did not apply for a refinance with my mother as collateral, I said. I did not file a petition accusing my mother of a disease to jump ahead in line. I did not threaten a judge inside my head, which is where you threatened me that day, Evan. I know the difference between a mistake and a plan. He stared past me into the house. His eyes snagged on the work table, on Ethel, on the light that hit the floor like it had lost something. He said, "Why didn't you just sign a power of attorney? I was trying to manage things." I said, "You wanted to own me. If you wanted to help, you'd have asked how. You'd have listened when I answered." He said, "I did. You never let me finish." I said, "You talk like a man who has been told he is the smartest person in every room. I raised you to be confident. I forgot to teach you to be humble." The words landed. I could see it. He flinched like a seam just ripped in a place he thought was strong. "Do you want money?" he asked. Desperate. Ugly. "Is that what this is about? Do you want punishment?" "I want peace," I said, "and dignity. And privacy. You may have none of those things from me until you learn the difference between care and control." He put his hands in his pockets and then took them out again, like pockets could hide a person. "So that's it? I don't have a mother?" "You do," I said. "You have a mother who will not co-sign your cruelty." He looked at the sidewalk. "I hate you," he said. Small, unconvincing, a boy pretending hissy strength he didn't feel. "No," I said, "you hate that I did not fall." He stood there a long time, chewing a thread only he could see. Then he left, and his leaving felt like a door behind a door finally closing. If you think this is the part where I say time healed us, you are listening to the wrong story. Time did what time does. It gave me mornings. It gave him chances. It also gave consequences. He took a job 2 cities away. Alyssa stayed with her sister, then got an apartment with hardwood floors and plants she named. She sent me a photo of a pothos named Myrtle and a message, "I test my soil before I water now. I take care before I take action." That summer, our community center hosted a little showcase. No tickets, just chairs, no fancy lights, just a string of bulbs that made everything feel like the right idea. The kids showed what they'd made. Jackets that sat correctly on bones that had never felt tailored. Dresses that didn't apologize for bodies that had decided who to be. I stood in the back and let tears do what tears do when they're not being used as evidence. "You can send mail," I said. "I will read it when I'm ready. I will not reply right away. I will choose what my life spins itself on." He said, "Okay." He said he understood, even though I knew he didn't yet. He said goodbye, and the call clicked off, and the house felt like a place where voices had learned their correct volume. A week later, a postcard arrived. It had a photograph of a lighthouse. On the back, in his careful engineer print, he wrote, "I looked up guardianship abuse today. I'm ashamed. I will pay your legal fees. Not because that fixes anything, because it's a beginning." There was a sentence at the bottom, whispered in ink. "I remember the jacket you made me for the 8th grade dance. It made me feel like I knew where my shoulders belonged." I placed the postcard in the red portfolio. I do not keep everything. I kept this. September leaned on the city with a warm hand. The kids went back to school, the light changed its mind earlier each day, and I bought apples that tasted like a Men's. Needle and Light added an evening class for nurses who wanted to mend scrubs and hearts on their off days. Dr. Maholtra came, of course. Her stitches were comically large at first. She laughed at herself until they got small, and then she laughed again because progress is funny, if you're honest.
Nora started seeing a man named Walt who wore socks with jokes on them. She pretended she didn't like him until she did. I told her he was gentle. She told me I was lucky to have an opinion. We are both right so often it's a hazard.
One night, I dreamed of the courtroom. In the dream, the benches were filled with every woman I had ever dressed, sitting still with their hands folded on their laps, waiting for my cue. I stood at the front, held up a needle, and said, "Tell me where it hurts." They pointed to places that had never belonged to men, their stubborn foreheads, their calves that carried miles of persistence, their hips that had been bargaining tables for employers who called them dear. I woke with the taste of steel in my mouth and knew it wasn't fear. It was resolve. The brownstone settled into its old role as a place where stories begin. I kept the smart hub because I refused to let an object tell me where I am safe. I changed its settings until it worked for me. I set it to turn the hallway light pink at dusk because it makes the mirrors gentler. I set it to play Ellington when the stove is on because a trumpet will remind you of every debt you owe to rhythm. My hands aren't perfect. They shake when I look at certain photographs. They tremble when somebody knocks too hard. But give them a needle and thread, and they still remember the straight line, the patience, the way you pull until it resists and then stop, because force is the enemy of good work. This is how I live now, with softness and a lock, with laughter and a list, with a heart that has learned the difference between an apology and a promise. People ask me, quietly, as if they are afraid to wake the part of me that still bleeds, whether I regret taking my son to court. I tell them I never took my son anywhere. He took me. I simply refused to stay. If they press, I tell them I regret everything and nothing, which is the only honest answer. I regret that love can become a weapon when fear holds it. I regret that a boy who once believed light bulbs had magic in their glass became a man who thought a deed could make him whole. I regret that I did not teach the class he needed most, the one about how to be gentle with power. But I do not regret my voice. I do not regret the red portfolio that smells like velvet and surviving. I do not regret the seat I took in a room where people lie for money and tell themselves it is care. I sat there and told the truth until it sounded like music. Last week, Dante wore his storm jacket to a casting call and booked a part that pays in pizza and joy. He came by to tell me, knees bouncing, mouth buzzing, and I gave him a spool of thread to hold while he talked so his hands could say amen. He asked if I would come see him perform. I said yes. I always say yes to the show. When the lights went down and he walked on stage with shoulders that knew exactly where they belonged, I cried the quiet kind of tears that don't beg for attention. It felt like the first day on a new production, when you know the set will hold and the costumes will not betray you. My name is still Ruth Calder. I am not incapacitated. I am complicated. I am the sum of 1,000 fittings and 100 goodbyes and a dozen bad decisions and one son I refuse to define by his worst day. I teach kids to make scenes that last longer than applause. I make soup that tastes like mercy. I iron fabric with the same respect I give to names. I wake each day in a house that has learned to listen to me again. And when I sleep, the city hums outside like an orchestra tuning, everybody different, everybody necessary, everybody trying to find the note that makes us more ourselves. If you have ever been told your story by someone who needed you to be smaller, take your voice back. If you have ever been called a problem because you declined to become property, put on your lipstick or your work boots or whatever armor reminds you that you are not required to apologize for having survived. And if a paper arrives one day with your name stretched across it like a stage, remember this: the only person who gets to direct you without your consent is a fire marshal. I keep the court order in a drawer now, not on the refrigerator. I keep the postcard from my son next to it. I keep a spool of that storm-colored thread in my pocket like a talisman. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and even the smart hub has decided we have talked enough, I take out the thread and wrap it around my finger, just tight enough to feel my pulse. I am here. I am mine. I am making something. And when I am ready for an ending, I will hymn it myself, careful and steady, so it does not unravel when the lights come up and the audience goes home.